Welcome to Master Your Merger, the podcast for leaders navigating the people side of mergers and acquisitions. Each week, your host Klint Kendrick talks with deal makers, HR leaders, and integration experts to uncover what really works when it comes to people, culture, and performance during a deal. From retaining top talent to aligning leadership, you'll hear real stories and actionable insights from the people doing the work, all designed to help you make your merger work. If you're leading through M&A, this is your weekly playbook.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Master Your Merger podcast. Today, I'm joined by Lynette Buit with People First M&A Partners. Lynette brings 19 years of experience in the field of human resources with a 15-year focus on domestic and global mergers and acquisitions. She's a highly experienced HR M&A consultant with diverse industry experience in the delivery of well-planned and executed HR due diligence and HR integrations. Lynette's led or supported over 60 M&A deals, including acquisitions, divestitures, and joint ventures. She has exceptional project management skills, analytical thinking, and creative problem solving, which all adds up to a great HR M&A practitioner. Lynette, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I wish I got that intro like every day. Wouldn't it be fun if you could just have that intro every day? It's exciting. I love it. Good times.
Well, you definitely deserve it. You are one of the most trusted folks that I know in our community, and you definitely bring a wealth of knowledge and experience, and I really appreciate that in you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate you, my friend.
Well, thanks. So, Lynette, let's start with your background. What have you done in the world of HR M&A? And we're going to talk a little bit about due diligence today. So maybe tell us a bit about how you learned due diligence.
Yeah. My background, it's funny because I don't even know if you know this, Clint, but I actually started as a paralegal and I was a paralegal for 9 years. And then I got into human resources, just doing a variety of different things and kind of fell. I did a quote there into doing HR M&A work because it looked interesting. And that was in 2010. And I have literally been doing it ever since, just at a variety of different organizations. It's a combination of kind of doing it in the Fortune 500 arena, doing it at smaller companies, startups, hospitals, private equity, portcos, things of that nature. And it kind of crosses all industries. My experience does. I've done it in pharma, financial services, technology, healthcare, you name it. So, yeah. And what was interesting is when I first got into it, it was right at the diligence part. It's funny because my very first deal was it was something. I'll say it like that. And it was something because it was actually a bidder situation. I've had very few of these. That might actually be the only one I've ever had. It was a bidder situation. We were actually divesting or carving out a piece of a division at one of the companies I worked for. And so we were very much, I was taking care of kind of the employee data and I was understanding the important criticality of that. But we were selling, if you will, the people, meaning we were trying to, put together decks and have conversations and get the VP of HR ready to have conversations about who these people were and why they're important and how critical the work that they do is and where they're located. And so it was really different. It wasn't like what I would call a typical first deal because I think it was also around like a $2 billion deal. And that's not typical, just for anybody listening, zero. That's not normal. So anyway, I started off and I was like giving 50% of my time and I got in, and it was like me and it was the lawyer and it was the VP of HR and that's it. And
oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was just the three of us. And so I learned a lot. It was kind of you had to be kind of scrappy, which I love being. And so, but it was just interesting because it was such a different kind of deal for me. And I wasn't kind of playing an overall. I just had different hats I was wearing. So, but I knew I loved it. That's the key takeaway. I knew I loved it. And so I decided to keep doing it. And 15 years later, I'm still doing it.
Well, and starting off on the sell side, I mean, that's pretty fascinating. So I imagine that I know that when I've done divestments, I've just felt overwhelmed sometimes by the amount of questions that a buyer will ask. And on a $2 billion deal, I think that's a little more understandable than on like a $10 million deal.
Yeah.
So what was that like for you?
It was intense. Because as you know, in a bitter situation, I think at the point that I entered, there were 6, and then they dwindled it down to 4. But it's what I didn't know at the time, and of course I know now, was you have to be a bit strategic in what you decide to hand over in terms of documents and what you decide to answer. Not like it's not about hiding anything. I don't mean to say that, but it's more about really being deliberate in how you want to answer things, because also, I ended up doing another deal when I went to my next company, where I was on my first official HR M&A team as an internal, where they were very, very good. I was surrounded by ridiculously smart people that they allowed me to learn. And then that's where I really kind of honed those skills of what does it mean to do a divestiture or a carve out, whatever, or a joint venture or whatnot, to where you are running. I ran the show actually on, and by the show, I mean, I owned the, all of the responses and the document production, if you will, for a joint venture that had 16,000 people in it, and it was in 30 plus countries. So it was, and believe me, there were not just 5 of us working on this. There were literally like hundreds. For all functions, there were so many of us working on this. But I was able to take that experience, that initial experience of what it means to actually provide data, what you need to provide, what you don't need to provide. Because I have pretty clear thoughts around things that, are truly considered PII, and they're not necessarily relevant pre-sign. So that's the realm I'm thinking in. And so when I did it at my next company for the 16,000 employees, that's when I felt like I really got the opportunity to shine, because I was like, okay, how do I be deliberate about this? How do I be strategic and align with my cross-functional partners, while also making sure that, the buyers get what they need. So I feel like it's a bit of a balance, but I also am not, I'm not going to sit here and say, though, you give them everything all at once up front. I'm not a fan of it.
Well, and even when on the buy side, that almost seems like a good rule, right?
Mm-hmm.
Prioritize your diligence checklist, get those most critical things up front.
Agreed.
So, when we think about HR diligence and, as a bit of a gated process, more information up front, a little more information as we go through it, what are some of the risks of not doing a thorough diligence and maybe just stopping at that real high level overview versus maybe going a little bit deeper?
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like, and I think you and I have talked about this before, but I feel like the time for diligence is becoming shorter and shorter. Mm. And honestly, I've seen more of that post COVID. I don't know if you have as well, Klint, but I definitely have. And I've seen a lot more simultaneous sign and close.
Yes.
So then, right. So then it's like all hands on deck, because you only have so much time. Like I know a couple of deals I did in like 2022, I probably had maybe a week or 2 for diligence, which right. You have 300 people in 11 countries, and 9 of those countries are countries where contractors sit. The rest are employees and maybe some other contractors. It just makes the complexity level higher, right? So to do a proper due diligence in 2 weeks, to me, yes, you're talking about the high level items to look for. Obviously, you want to look for any level of financial liabilities, right? To me, like that's a given. Whether let's say they still have a pension plan. I don't see it too often anymore, but I won't say that it doesn't exist. Yeah. For sure. Because if I say that the first time I say that, then it's going to exist. That would be the first one I would look for. Then I would look for, just to see, especially the type of deal it is. Do they have a 401k plan, right? Then it's just a matter of, do we need to shut it down at close? Let's say it's a share deal or stock deal, depending on what language you use. I'm a big fan. Like that's one thing that I will actually advocate for, is to shut it down, as opposed to, if you don't shut it down, you're going to have to eventually merge it into the buyer's plan. And that's an administrative burden. I'll use that word, burden. And when I say administrative burden, I truly mean that. I'm not just using a big word that means something big. It's truly it is an administrative burden. Now, companies do it all the time. I'm just not a big fan of that. And then it's looking at, let's say, for example, at that high level, do they have any employment-related litigation? Have people been suing them because they've, encountered a hostile environment, or they've been discriminated against or retaliated against, things like that? Those to me are like the givens, right? You're always going to look for that no matter what. Also look at their turnover. Like, did they have some amount of, off the board or off the charts turnover that you're kind of like, it makes you kind of shake your head. You're like, I don't understand this. This doesn't make sense. And maybe it's in comparison to the industry turnover. Maybe it's location. Maybe it could be a variety of things, right? But those to me are all kind of the givens. But the value I feel like also that comes in diligence is when you're able to really get in and look at who the employees are. Because if this is a talent play, like if the buyer is really looking at this from a talent perspective, and there's, we're going to keep everybody, and and they want to grow and things, and those are, the most fun deals to do, which are the ones that I've gotten to do in the last couple of years. So it's been really fun, but it's also still really fast. But I'm still looking like, who are the employees? Who are the contractors? Where are they located? I know this is really tactical, but it matters. And even getting a chance to look at and fully flush out the contractors. I will tell you that compliance has been a sticking point in the last couple of years in the deals that I've done, because sometimes when, US-based companies, not always, but sometimes when they look to, because they have clients outside the US, they don't want to, set up a legal entity. So they bring in contractors. And if they find the talent that way, that's perfectly fine. But it's then when you go in and actually do diligence on it and find out maybe they're not compliant, or maybe they're, there's reasons that, let's say, that contractor might have to pursue litigation or whatever the case is, then it becomes an issue, right? That we have to account for and either decide whether, the buyer has to decide as a whole. In my case, my client has to decide, because usually now I'm on the buy side, whether they're going to take that client on or take that contractor on in the way in which they are today, or they need everything changed by close. Right.
So I'm almost hearing you say, Lynette, that if we look at the we look at the timelines getting shorter, the one thing I'll throw in that we haven't talked about yet is AI. I'm seeing a lot of AI moved into the diligence process right now, which I honestly don't know how effective it is. I'm sure it'll be getting more and more effective as the models mature. Yeah. Right.
I hope so. Literally, I'm like waiting to see.
Right. And I know a lot of products are starting to build that in, so they'll do a data room review for you. So I think the timelines are getting shorter due to business need. We're seeing the technology trying to catch up. But it's still that table stakes, right? So it's checking out compliance risks like proper contractor classification, like the disposition of your defined benefit plans, defined benefit pension plans, or even your defined contribution plans. Just those financial and compliance risks are the table stakes. What about the upside, right? So when you get to really dig in and look at the workforce during the diligence phase, what's the advantage of that and having a little bit of extra time to go through the workforce and really understand what you're buying?
Well, and I'll tell you where I see that come up a lot is when, so you're in the diligence process and the seller has put forth, let's say, a list of key employees. What I'm seeing more and more with that list, I'm going to start here if that's okay, is that list is, in my humble opinion, large, right? Sometimes it's almost 40 or 50% of the company, right? So then it's like looking at that, understanding, and I feel like there's a part of diligence that sometimes is getting missed too, I think, with the amount of virtual work we do and when it's shortened, right? And that's the on-site. Because some of those key employees will come to the on-site because they're in the know about the deal. Well, at least the executive level, right? Or the leadership. Sure. And so you get to know them. There's one thing to read their names, read what the founders have written about them, even have a conversation about it. That's a baseline for me. Like, you have to do that. But then you get it then on-site, which I had the opportunity to do with a client in the last couple of years. I think I did 2 or 3 of them with them now that I think about it. And it's funny, COVID had kind of made me forget how important it was to be in front of somebody and see them, see how they react, see how they, what are the words that kind of they're using to describe, because a lot of times you'll hear, well, everything's great. It's great. Everything's great. Everyone's great. Right. Well, and I mean, let's be honest. I don't know what world. I mean, I would love to live in that world. If that world exists, please, someone give me an invitation. However, I don't live in that world. And that's certainly a world that I don't see in diligence. So what I think, like having the time to do a proper onsite, having the time to get to know, obviously the entire employee population, depending on how big it is, you can't know every single person, but especially the keys. Because then when you get, and especially if some of them are a condition to sign, because sometimes, we'll have a short list, 7, 8, 10 people that are a condition to sign, and then everybody else is a condition to close. So then you're dealing with 7, 8, 10 people. And I will tell you that I've had deals in the very recent past where we basically heard from the founders where they're like, well, you know what? I think based on that employment agreement, they are not going to sign. And we were a week away from sign. So that's a problem, right? So that tells me, okay, a diligence wasn't done well enough to where we would know how they would respond. Now I say this to say, just because somebody asks for it, whether they're in the C-suite or they're not in the C-suite, doesn't mean that the letter's going to change, the content's going to change.
Sure.
But knowing that information, taking the time to get to know who these keys are, if they are really key, and if they walk away, we are in trouble as a buyer, right? We are in trouble. Like the business is in trouble. The deal value is in trouble. It's just taking that time, get to know who those people are. How are they going to respond to the deal? Are they going to be excited? And also in the back of my mind, because I love all things like change management, change enablement. I'm thinking, who can be our champion? Like who's going to be that person that we can leverage, but also how are they viewed by the business and how are they viewed by the employees? And what I mean by that is, like, if they aren't jazzed, they aren't happy. And I know that's the person that, we need to do maybe a little bit of a higher touch with, then that's what we need to do. But you don't know that if you don't take the time. And it doesn't have to be weeks and weeks and weeks, but it is more than a 5-minute exercise.
Right. That leadership diligence, especially Lynette, is so important. I'm thinking of a couple of deals I did, where just table stakes, a social media search on a company founder. So number of years ago, we had one that as we were searching social media, we all of a sudden found restraining orders against that person. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And so we were like, well, maybe this isn't the kind of person that we really want leading a division for the company I was working for at the time. Or another situation where we had a founder that we did some social media work on, and found out that 90% of the social media feed was a second business this person had started, which is great, multiple interests.
Right.
They were running a couple of industries, but it was just so clear from the volume of that they really weren't interested in captaining the ship we were buying. They wanted to go do this other thing. So I remember talking to Corp Dev going, hey, I don't think that he wants to run this company for the next couple of years. Maybe we should think about a alternative plan where we bring him on for 6 months and then transition to a new leader. This was I was new to that firm at the time, and they didn't hear me, and that's fine. Put it in the diligence report. And I remember about 6 months later, the head of Corp Dev came to me and said, hey, Klint, so-and-so's thinking about leaving. And I'm like, oh, really? Who would have thought that he wanted to go run this other business full time? If only somebody had told you.
If only somebody had mentioned it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But fortunately, we were prepared and had a sense of what was going to happen. And those two things, just basic internet searches, Lynette. So it surprises me how often buyers don't even do that basic step in diligencing leaders.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that too, because I've got a couple of deals that are kind of coming from last year into this year, and one thing I noticed too, and I don't know if you noticed this, and as well, but with founders, one thing I notice, just to jump off of this, is they don't fully. I don't know, is it they don't know the acquisition process. They don't know the diligence and how kind of intense and hardcore it can be, because it is. I mean, I'm just being very candid. It is especially for them, however long it takes, whether it's 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, a year. I don't know if it always goes a year, but even 5 months can be a lot. And so then I see them get surprised, right? So this is kind of this is another piece of, when we think about leader diligence, they get surprised almost by the expected, if that makes sense. Like they start looking at, let's say, an employment agreement. Like let's talk about the founders, right? They start looking at like an employment agreement or a retention letter or whatnot, right? And they're like, wow, this is not what I expected. Not from a number perspective, just from a content and how companies put together documents when they're bringing folks into their organization.
Yeah.
Founders think differently, I think. I mean, this is my observation, just based on my, my long time of doing this, is they're surprised. And that always, for some reason, for me, it always surprises me that they're surprised.
Right.
And it's almost like I wish there was an opportunity to educate founders, leaders on what it really means to go through the process, right? In a way where then they're not so surprised. Because let's be honest, nobody likes to be surprised in this kind of work.
Right.
Like when you're a founder and you've already made the decision to sell, but you don't really know what that means or what that looks like or how it's going to end up. I mean, I know that I have to believe that the founders know that. I mean, let's be honest. I started my own company 7 years ago and then, brought in a business partner. So I'm one of them. So it's like I'm sitting back and kind of watching them thinking, isn't there a way to educate them so that this is a smooth process for them? Right. Like you said, whether they want to stay or go, whether it's they want to stay for 6 months, although that is good to know that early on. I 100% agree with that. I 1,000% actually agree with that. You don't typically like to find that out 6 months post-close if you didn't have an inkling of it, but you did. But, I just feel like that would help the diligence process, and maybe even it would even shorten it. I don't know. Like, please don't anybody listening to this shorten it less than a week. Like, please don't do it. But I mean, like, if for those where you actually get the time just to make it more efficient. So anyway, I just, it's just an observation that I've made in the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years.
So we've talked a little bit about diligencing the financial aspects. We've talked about some of the compliance aspects. We've now talked about leadership. You talked about turnover, which in my mind affects operations, right? How are you going to run this business if people keep leaving? Are there any other diligence areas, Lynette, that you like to focus on?
Well, I mean, of course, I'm always looking at what kind of like a compensation philosophy do they have in their organization, or do they even have one? A lot of times we'll just run into the idea that maybe they have one, or it's informal or whatnot, because it is a difference. Like if people are coming in and they're getting, job titles and they're being leveled, I don't want to say loosey-goosey, because I don't think that's a fair statement, but it's just not as structured maybe as it could be. Maybe that's a better way to say it. Yeah. And then they're going into because most of my clients have some level of a structure. Not all, but I'll say a good portion of them have a structure. They have a comp structure. It may not be fully transparent to everybody, but they do have one. And so that becomes another area where the founders or the leaders are like, wait a minute. I was head of engineering. I'm going to make that up. Head of engineering, or I was head of finance. And now you're asking me to be a manager.
Right.
But you're looking at maybe a 300-person company as opposed to maybe a 15,000-person company or a 5,000 even person company. Right. So that for me, like, tends to be a big delta in diligence when I think about the leaders, but it also happens, for the, folks that are just now, when they get their offer letter, and they're looking at it, they're like, I was a manager and now I'm an associate. Because I think there's a cultural aspect in that as well that you can also uncover. There's a big cultural aspect, obviously, in during diligence, which we could spend 3 hours on, and I'm happy to talk about it any time, but I don't want to take up everybody's time today. But there is a cultural aspect of, I feel like, and I'd be curious to your opinion on this, Clint. Folks, and I was born and raised in the United States, so full-blooded American. I feel like, for the most part, not always, but for the most part, people care about titles.
Sure.
That's what I sense in the US. I
Yeah.
don't always sense that as the same outside the US. It just depends on the country, right?
Well, I can't necessarily speak to the cultural differences, but I think I'm tracking absolutely. I know that on several recent deals, I have just ended up in the weeds with folks' job titles. And I understand why. It's such a critical part of our identity. And I do think as Americans, we tend to, the studies say we spend more hours at work than what I'll jokingly call the civilized world, right? We work more hours, we take less vacation. Our productivity numbers don't necessarily reflect the extra hours that we put in the office, which is probably something we as a national culture should look at over time. But that's a whole different conversation.
Animal.
Right. So we spend more time at work, and it makes sense that our identities get tied up in things like our job titles or,
Yes.
even the branding. I think
Yes.
you and I have compared notes in the past about where people will come into an announcement day if they know the announcement's coming and they'll be wearing like their old logo shirts. So
Yeah.
there's definitely an identity component that gets tied up.
Yeah. And that, well, and rightfully so. Obviously, employees, leaders, exec, doesn't really matter where you are in the organization. You're interested in that offer letter or the welcome letter or whatever form it tends to take, where you're like, okay, what is my title? Do I have to move?
Right.
And it's when I think about just, the leveling, the kind of role mapping, the compensation that goes along with that, whether it's you're bonus eligible here, you're not bonus eligible here, right? You get options here, or there's an equity refresh or whatnot. And maybe or maybe not, it happens over here, meaning, seller buyer. But it's what I find is it's like the change of it all. One, it can be very overwhelming if there hasn't been discussion about potential sale of the company at any point. I feel like it can just be overwhelming to say, okay, well, so we're letting you know that the deal, depending on when they do it, sign or close, the deal, there's going to be a deal and you're going to move over to X company. And then you're kind of like, oh gosh, so I feel like every part of diligence can impact that experience. Cause like
Right.
the way that I think about it, because when I get into diligence, I'm looking at all of the things that we've talked about. Right. But again, I have my cute little change hat on where I'm thinking about, okay, so when I, do a side-by-side analysis and I'm looking at the buyer and I'm looking at the seller and depending upon the topic, I say, okay, well then I know we need to spend extra time talking about this because this could be not an issue, but like just maybe something they want to know more about. Now, there could be areas where there are drastic differences, drastic enough to where the impact is high, right? So like when I'm doing that diligence, and if you're given the right amount of time, which, I mean, please give me 2 weeks every single day of the week. I mean, I take 4 on 6, you know what I mean? Like, but please give me at least 2, especially if we're going to do an offsite, because I want to, yeah. So it's looking at every piece of that company that touches that employee's life, basically, and saying, what are going to be the differences? What are going to be the changes? And in some cases, it's exciting because maybe like they're moving from no employer contribution on the 401k to a nice employer contribution. I see that a lot. That's amazing, right? I think it's amazing. I want to hope they think it's amazing, but it's looking at all of the different pieces that affect their employment and their life, if you will, and then using that for integration planning.
Right. Well, and I think that there's an interesting belief out there, and I think we're starting to see more than just cracks in this. I think we're starting to see chasms in it, thankfully, where integration planning for a very long time was considered a very secondary thought, right? It was, okay, the financials work out, and so magically this business that we've bought is going to integrate smoothly, and we're going to go deliver value based on it. So you've talked quite a bit in the last couple of minutes. We've talked about some of those cultural elements. And let's just kind of bring it home for the folks that are like, why do we care so much about culture? Why do we care so much about integration? And it's because that's what the value driver is, right? Is that if we can remove the distraction of the culture change, if we can remove the distraction of a choppy integration period and make it more seamless, then the employees go on to perform and produce whatever it is the deal thesis was about, right? So. Are there any stories you could tell? I know you've got a ton of experience, 60 plus deals. Are there any stories that you have about where you found like a cultural gem that just really helped unlock a smoother transaction?
Well, candidly, transparency is probably, and I love transparency. I'm a big fan of it. And what I'm not a fan of, and and I know this is the opposite of what you just asked, but when you come out and you say, hey, like, let's say a leader comes out and says, hey, I want to take the best of both worlds. And everybody that's sitting down, that's going to actually go do the work, knows that isn't true. Right. So I think if you start with transparency, and I don't think this is like, I don't know if this is a gem, but I don't know if it's the gem, because for me, but it's a baseline. That's, I guess, how I see it. It's a baseline. Be as transparent as you can, especially if you're between sign and close. We haven't come together. We're not one team yet. However, be as transparent as you can about what they have to look forward to, what you expect is going to happen, and what it's going to mean for them, because it goes back to that with them, right? That whole what's in it for me. And I think when you think about culture, I find a lot of times when I'm on the buy side, the seller's culture is strong. I don't know that I've ever had an instance where it was just kind of not that strong, or kind of just mediocre. No, I would say, for me at least, 9 times out of 10, that seller culture is strong. So then one is, as the buyer, appreciate where they've come from and do not forget about their culture. I'm not saying you have to adhere to everything that's in it. And it also depends on what your integration strategy is when they're actually, so there's some nuances to this, but appreciate it, be transparent, appreciate where they've come from, because they made a decision to go to that company. They didn't make a decision on their own to come to yours, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely.
So, right. So it's like, it's transparency, it's acknowledgement, but it's also acknowledgement to pull the thread from the point that you start communicating to the point that, like, they're kind of fully integrated. Don't do it once and then forget about it, because they need to know that where they came from was important. There's a reason you're buying that company, but they haven't been involved in all of the due diligence, in the specifics and the tactical. Typically none of that. That is usually maybe 10 people at max, right? I mean, depending upon the size of their organization. So it's just a matter of, and to me, these are common sense things, Clint. Sure. These are not earth shattering. These are things, but I do find they don't happen a lot, candidly, unless someone's got their keen eye on it and they're saying, okay, I see all these communications documents, or I see this change management plan, but I don't see anything where you're kind of acknowledging where they're coming from. You're just talking about where they're moving to.
Yeah, that's a really good point in the change process, right? You can't just be headed in one direction if you're not already aligned. So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So for HR pros that are really looking to strengthen their place in M&A, obviously getting in at the diligence process is critical. And I hear all the time from folks, especially with firms that haven't done a lot of M&A, that are new buyers, where, the poor HR person finds out, hey, we've just signed a deal, right? We're going to let all the employees know on Monday. And it's like Friday at 3 p.m., and the poor HR person's getting tapped on the shoulder. I hear it all the time. So what piece of information would you, what piece of advice would you give to folks that really haven't had a chance to get into the diligence process to do their integration planning? Do you have a tip for someone like that?
Well,
other than pray?
Yeah, other than pray. Yeah, if you're a prayer, do that. If you like to go for walks and that's your version of praying, go for a walk. Do whatever it is you do or your version. The one thing I would say, though, is if there are documents from diligence, educate yourself. Okay. Go back to those documents, find out in the quickest manner that you can who this company is, where they're located, how they pay people, so on and so forth. What benefits do they have? And then what's changed, right? And who are those key employees, if they identified any, to try to bring yourself up to speed. Now, sometimes you go and the documents don't exist. And you have to wait. I will tell you that I've had this recently within the last couple of years. And even as someone that's been doing this work the whole time, it's not easy to go in and not have any frame of reference for the diligence other than very high level, right? And then also so you kind of have to do a little bit of your own discovery, if you will, once you've integrated and get to know folks and who are the right key players and what was agreed to in the purchase agreement. So it's a bit of a mix, right? And I had to do it, and it's not easy. I will say that out loud. And I'm happy to talk to anybody that wants to chat about it, because it's difficult and you're moving at a very fast pace, typically, right? And there are certain milestones that have to be met, whatever they are. And but do as much education as you can about how we got here, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
What did we find out? Who are the key players? And then honestly, when you get into the integration process, don't be afraid to ask questions. I know that sounds also like a baseline, but you'd be surprised in certain cultures how that's not something that is supported, for lack of a better word. But ask questions, because it's only going to make your job easier and your ability to help everyone, right? If you're trying to help run, PM, assist, support, whatever the word is, the integration, just ask as many questions as you can. I think the more deals you do will help. But if it's your first deal, just ask as many questions as you can. And then, you can always pick my brain as well. I'm happy to help, because I know what it's like to be there, even as someone that's been doing it. And it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Lynette. Thank you. So we're just about out of time today. Well, why don't we share where people can connect with you and learn more about you?
All right. Well, you can always find me on LinkedIn. I think you're probably going to put the spelling of my name, I assume.
Absolutely. We'll have a link to your LinkedIn and your website in the show notes.
Perfect. Yeah, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. I will get back with you, I promise. You can always email me if you so choose. So maybe we'll stick that in the show notes as well. You can look on our website and you can contact us that way. But I would say probably the fastest way to get me would be you can call or text me, because I'm happy to do that. If you've got it, especially when you've got like an urgent need, I would say LinkedIn or call or text me. And I'll also stick my cell phone number in there as well. So I'm very reachable.
Perfect. Well, and Lynette, you're a very, very generous person in the community, a great thought partner over the last several years. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Thanks so much, Lynette.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was fun. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Master Your Merger, hosted by Klint Kendrick. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found this valuable, share it with someone leading through a deal. To explore toolkits, resources, and upcoming programs, including our free roundtables, visit masteryourmerger.com. We'll see you next time.